Okay, everyone. Thank you for coming to our online seminar today, the Hi5 Labs 2022 Summer Seminar Series. We have an excellent guest today, uh, longtime friend from University of Minnesota, Vicky Interrante. Vicky, you were one of the. I'm gonna confess something to you. I was a little bit starstruck when I first met you at APGV many years ago. But I'm very happy to have gotten to know you over the past few years, and I could probably read your bio from memory, but just to make sure I'm hitting all the bases here. Dr. Interrante is a full professor in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at the University of Minnesota. She also directs the Center for Cognitive Sciences. She is a VGTC Virtual Reality Career Award winner, also a winner of the 1999 PCASE Award, um, for one of the highest honors bestowed on by the U.S. government on outstanding scientists and engineers beginning their careers. Plus, where we met, you founded, co-founded APGV, later became SAP, and which is just an excellent venue for the kind of work that involves perception and virtual and augmented reality. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn this over to you with one announcement. So for those of you watching live right now, any questions you have, go ahead and type those in the chat box, and we'll address those at the end of the talk. So Vicky, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you. So if you want to go ahead and share your slides.
Okay. Thank you so much for inviting me. Let's see, where are my slides? Sorry. Microsoft PowerPoint. There we go. All right. Yeah. It's really an honor to be here with you. I can't see any of you on the um, but I'm assuming that you're there. So let's see. Let me figure out how to make this really small. If I go slideshow, can you all see that with no boxes in front of it?
Yep. Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Okay, great. So here we are. So as Adam told you, I'm pretty old, and also as you can tell, I've been working in the field of computer science, computer graphics, virtual reality for about, I don't know, 30 some odd years. And a topic that's been really near and dear to my heart has been the question of spatial perception in architectural environments. And let's see. Okay, so there we go. I had a long time collaboration with a colleague of mine who's a professor in the Department of Architecture. He'd been teaching at the University of Minnesota for about, I don't know, almost 30 years when we started our collaboration. And what he told me is that he could, just by looking at the product of a student's design, he could, at the finished product, he could tell what tools they had used to come up with their design ideas. And that's because he said that our imagination space is shaped in very subtle but stark ways by the tools that we use to instantiate our ideas. So when you're thinking about architectural modeling, the primary tools are pencil and paper, small materials like 3D printing or cardboard models, or CAD, computer generated design. And what my colleague noticed is that there are a few characteristics of the designer's relationship with the product of their design that cause specific unfortunate outcomes in the process of architectural design. So when you're designing, say, a house or a school or a library or a hospital on a computer, the model is small with respect to you as the viewer. I'm out here, my model lives in the computer screen. I'm also, as the designer, external to my model. I'm out here, my model is there on the computer. So I'm looking at it from the outside. When I try to zoom in, parts of the model go off screen, and at that point they sort of cease to exist in my imagination space. It's not like the model continues to exist beyond the screen. The screen is just like a cutoff, and whatever's off screen is sort of out of sight, out of mind. Additionally, with classical programs, 3D modeling programs like SketchUp, it can be cumbersome and non-intuitive to adjust the vantage point from which you're viewing the model. So you can say, look at this example of a house on the screen. You can imagine zooming in to be able to see it from a closer view, but the controls make it very difficult to say, walk through the model and walk up to the kitchen and turn around and explore the house the way you would if you were actually going through it. And as a result of this inherent structure of the design process, so how does that affect the design outcomes? So one example is conceptualization of the design from a single preferred vantage point. So here's a typical illustration of a house that might be on the market. It's a fairly small house, and as you can see from the credits, I pulled it from a website that's selling homes, and it looks really nice. You can see that it's computer generated, and it's from the front, and it looks like a pretty nice house. So here's an example of a similar house from the side. And I guess you can all see what's wrong with this house. Now, maybe in the South, you guys don't like windows as much as we do up here in Minnesota, but as you can see behind me, I love windows. My whole house is filled with windows. I want to bring the outside in. I love nature. I like you look out my windows and you can see trees and green and anyway. So this is how I like to live. I would be really unhappy in a house like this. Like, what's going on? I mean, I don't know what the view is from this side. It doesn't seem like there's a view over here either. This is the garage, so maybe you don't care about a view from the garage. But at the same time, it's a design that what my colleague said is that people will think about the design from the front, and then maybe after the design's already been conceptualized, they'll go around and look at the other sides and just sort of touch up. But they're not the process is not holistically thinking about the design as a whole. It's thinking about the design from the single preferred vantage point, which is how the model happens to show up on your screen in the modeling program. Also, we get rectilinear forms that are aesthetic with respect to the aspect ratio of the screen. And my colleague used to refer to this as the tyranny of the screen. And this also happens on paper. We're drawing and we like to sort of fill out the paper. And so if we want designs that are more organic, like the famous buildings by architect Frank Gehry, you have to look at the design process that he uses. So, I'm sure he also uses a computer, but in design conceptualization, he works with materials like paper and cardboard. And so here's the concept, and here's the building, and the building flows from the concept. And here's an example of a building on our campus. This is the Weissman Art Museum in the University of Minnesota. Here's his concept sketch. So he lets his imagination space flow using materials that allow his imagination to develop. And then you get really interesting outcomes like this. On the contrary, if you start with a tool that sort of rigidly prescribes the types of things you can create. It's not that you can't create something more creative. You just don't think of it because you tend to go with what the tools allow you to do. And so for all of these reasons, my colleague was very much interested in looking at virtual reality as a tool, as one of the tools in the toolbox for architectural design. So here's my last example of the pitfalls of traditional design. So this is the computer science building at the University of Minnesota. It was built in 1991. And the firm that designed this building actually won an award for the design. And a couple of reasons why they won the award. Does anybody notice anything in this architectural feature? Well, I don't know. I can't. I guess I can't hear you. So I'll tell you. I'll tell you. If you guys are all probably all too young, but this, if you know anything about ancient computer science, this thing should look like a floppy disk. I mean, it doesn't really look like a floppy disk. I've cut the corner off in the picture, but at any rate, so they wanted to make an allusion to a floppy disk. This thing over here is supposed to evoke the sensation of a punch card. Therefore, the tiny, tiny porthole windows. My colleagues tell me the faculty had to fight for a couple more inches of window space because the architects really wanted it to look like a punch card from the building across the street. And so we have this building which has these awkward interior spaces that are sort of unusable because the architects wanted the front of the building to look like a floppy disk. And we have offices with very little natural light because the architects wanted the front of the building to look like a punch card. And they won an award for this because, floppy disk punch card, computer science. But as somebody who's had to live in this building for the past 20 years, I can say I'm really jealous of my colleagues who had other architects design their buildings, and they have beautiful natural light and then all kinds of things. But this is an example of a building that was designed from the point of view of an object. It was an art object that somebody was designing to look lovely from a bird's eye perspective, but without integrating the sense of what it feels like to experience the inside of the building. And so what my colleague Lee Anderson was focused on was bringing the user experience, putting the user experience, the occupant experience sort of foremost in the architectural design process. And to do that, he saw virtual reality as having a lot of potential. So with virtual reality, you can allow architects and clients to consider their designs from a first-person perspective. And this is an example of an early headset that he built. He 3D printed this frame and put an iPad on the inside and tracking it with a I think is a phase space tracker in this large area. So here's an example of one of our very earliest programs that we wrote. You can see 2003, so this is 20 years ago almost. And the vision of this was that people would come into our lab, sit down at a real table and chair, put on the headset, and find themselves at a virtual table and chair in matched locations. And in the virtual reality, we could put people into a context that would help to stimulate their imagination spaces. So the task here is designing some pinup boards for architecture students to share their work. And so these are the little kiosks. And so what you see is that the designer can sit at the table with a floor map of the building and design the kiosks in the context of the floor map. And at the same time can get up and walk around and see the kiosks in life size. And the designer can change an aspect of the design in life size, and it will be changed simultaneously in the scale model. Or you can change in the scale model, and it will simultaneously change in the life size. And you've got these things on the two sides that my colleague refers to as mood boards. So they're things, just pictures, and because it's VR, we can include videos that just sort of help to stimulate the designer's imagination space, because design doesn't happen in a vacuum. So here you are. You can see the virtual kiosks in the context of a 3D virtual model of the architectural courtyard where they will be instantiated. So this we proposed in 2003 as sort of a vision for how VR could have a role in improving the conceptual design process in architecture. So one of the problems with this, I mean, this was a really nice idea we had a student that built this system with immersive 3D modeling. We had this kiosk where you could pick colors and textures. And anyway, the problem with that though is that one group working at a university is not going to be able to compete with the capabilities offered by a full-fledged architectural design tool. And so we moved later into trying to allow students to use existing architectural design tools, but to hook them up with virtual reality. So here we have our master's student at the time, Ross Tredenick, using SketchUp on a tablet PC, and at the same time seeing the product of his design on a large reverse back projected screen in our lab. So this is the top-down view of our lab space. Sorry, this is our big screen, and there's Ross working sort of in the small and in the large at the same time. So hopefully it was kind of a long introduction, but it's important when you pick a research problem to make sure that it's well motivated. And in this case, there's a lot of many reasons why virtual reality and architectural design are go together well for architects, for clients, in many benefits. But there's also challenges. So in the beginning, when we started working on this, virtual reality equipment was really expensive. That's not a problem anymore. Currently, one of the problems with architectural design programs is that you can create a building, but the building itself is in a vacuum, and views from the windows are rarely considered, and that's something that our team has been working on recently. But the most important challenge right now is accurate spatial understanding. So as of probably 5 or 6 years ago, firms were still building physical mock-ups of critical spaces. So we have a new dorm on our campus, the 17th Avenue dorms, and it was built in, I don't know, I think the 2015 or something like that. And what my colleague told me was that the architectural firm actually built out an entire student apartment in real life size with electricity and everything, because they wanted to be able to do a walkthrough and make sure that there were going to be no changes to, say, the placement of the lights. Because if something like that, any changes that have to be made after construction has already started are extremely expensive. And people at that time just didn't feel confident enough in virtual reality to be that walking in a virtual model was going to be sufficient to be able to make all of the design decisions that needed to be made. Hopefully that's changing. I mean, that's what we've been working on, us and others have been working on for many years, is try to get to the point where these mock-ups no longer need to be built. And so the price of the mock-up that they developed for our dorm, my colleague estimated that at between $100,000 and $200,000. So it's a drop in the bucket compared to a multi-million-dollar project, but still not insignificant in terms of cost and also time and effort. But people really do need to be able to make accurate egocentric judgments of size and distance. And so, if a mock-up is the only way to do that, so be it. It is particularly, these mock-ups are used a lot in operating rooms and things like that, where space and moving around in space is really critical. Okay, so you work with Adam, so that distance perception, accurate distance perception in virtual reality has been a problem, and it's been a problem for decades, I would say. So 1993, people were writing about it. 20 years later, people were writing about it, and 15, 20 years after this, 10 years after this, people are still writing about it. And even with modern headsets, these errors in distance estimation range between 5 to 20%. So to give you a sense of what's the practical impact of this, when we were building our house, one of the questions the architects had for us is, in your living room, this living room right here that you can see, do you want the 8-foot ceilings or the 9-foot ceilings? And I was like, I have no idea. And then they said, well, the 9-foot ceiling is going to cost $3,000 more. So it's like, only I know what $3,000 means to my budget. Only I know what I feel like in an 8-foot, with a room with an 8-foot ceiling versus a 9-foot ceiling. But I couldn't make an informed decision because I had no idea what it was gonna feel like. And so I just asked the architect, and she said, "Oh, I would go with the builder," and she said I would go with the 9-foot ceilings. So that's what we did. But if the ideal thing would be, well, if I could go into virtual reality and see my living room and make the judgment myself. The problem is, if I've got a 20% error, you could put me in my living room and I'm about 5'7", so my eyeballs are probably 5 feet off the floor. If I look up at a 9-foot ceiling, that's 4 feet between my eyeball and the ceiling. So if I have a 20% error, that's going to be, almost a foot, right? And so a 9-foot ceiling is going to feel like, an 8 foot and change. And, then I might be going back to the builder and telling her, I really want like a 10-foot ceiling. Um, and then, I would walk into my build house and be like, what the heck? And also it would make a 20% error, would make a 12 by 15 bedroom feel like a 10 by 12 bedroom. So these errors have practical importance. And so what do we do about these errors in spatial perception? So one of the first things that my lab did was to look at the possibility of using avatars, self-avatars. So we thought that if we could give people an embodiment in virtual environment, we could increase their sense of presence and hopefully thereby induce them to assume action potential in the virtual environment that was the same as action potential in the real world, including distances. And so one of our earliest experiments, we embodied people in a virtual avatar, and we asked them to make judgments about egocentric distance in our virtual environment, with and without an avatar, to see if being embodied in an avatar made a difference. And so here were our two questions. Will self-embodied users perceive 3D space more accurately? And then if so, what aspects of the embodiment are going to be most important? So in total, we had 4 different avatar conditions. First, we had no avatar and a fully motion captured full geometry avatar. And then we had these other 2 intermediate conditions. So I'll talk about them later. So here's my undergraduate student, Mike Kading, modeling our setup. You can tell how old it is. This is an N-Visor headset and using the Vicon tracking system. This is the avatar that Mike found. Everybody was him. When you look down, this is what you saw. So, even though I don't match this avatar, it's plausible for me. This was the virtual environment. Well, this is the real environment that we modeled our virtual environment based off of. Here's the virtual reality version, and you can tell because of the aliasing that this is the virtual model and this is the real model. But other than that, it's a fairly good match. Everything's built out in 3D. Every office, if you'll notice, is 429. But other than that, it's fairly convincing. So what did we find? We found that when people had, so I guess I'll explain what I'm showing here. So here's the error that people made in their judgments of distance in the real world. So we had people, they would say, close your eyes. We would say, look at a spot, close your eyes, walk to where you think the spot is. They did this in the real room, and they did this in the real hallway. They did it in the virtual hallway. They did it in the virtual hallway first. We've done other experiments where we looked at the order and we didn't, well, we found some interesting order effects, but at any rate, in this case, we did the real world tests later. And so this is how people were in the real world. You can see some people tend to overwalk on average. Some people tend to underwalk on average, but in general, they're sort of distributed around the middle, which is 0%. This is the virtual world error. This is when we asked people to walk to a spot, we measured how far they were supposed to walk, how far they actually did walk, divide the difference between those two is divided by the amount they were supposed to walk, gives us the relative error. And so if we have points below the line, we're seeing that everybody is underwalking. Points above the line would be overwalking. And what you see along the diagonal is a dotted line that shows, so if people were doing the same thing in VR and the real world, then they would be points along this line. Like maybe people are afraid to walk with their eyes closed. Then you would expect a point sort of on the line down here. If they were just sort of overachieving, we would expect a point on the line up here. But if they're doing something different in the virtual reality than they're doing in the real world, then we would expect the points to be below the line. So you can see all these points are below the diagonal line, which means that people are underestimating distances in the virtual world as opposed to in the real world. And each of these points is an individual participant. So you can see that we had them do many different walks. And so we can see the standard error of their error as error bars around each point. And these three people were not significantly different in the real world and the VR. And we always get a few that are like that. So it doesn't mean everybody underestimates. It just means most people underestimate. Okay, so what happened when we gave people an avatar? Different people. So they got better. So you can see as you go back and forth, these points are closer to the line. You still have a certain number of people who are doing statistically equivalently in the VR and the real world. And you still have a whole bunch of people who are underperceiving in the virtual world compared to the real world, but not by as much. Okay, so an avatar helps. So what is it about the avatar that helps? I mean, at this time, the avatars were really expensive they were difficult to create, they were difficult to animate, and the avatars didn't look like. I mean, it's very difficult to get a personalized avatar. And so there were so many different directions for future work. We wanted to try to figure out, like, what's the most important part? Is it what the avatar looks like? Is it how the avatar moves? And so what we did is we couldn't make the avatar better, but we could make the avatar worse. And so what we decided to do is to compromise its geometric fidelity and to compromise its motion fidelity, and to see if by decreasing the fidelity, distance errors went up, and if so, then hopefully increasing the fidelity would reduce those errors more. So we had 10 participants in a geometrically faithful but non-articulated version of the avatar. We called this the stiff avatar. And 10 people were in a fully articulated avatar, but only represented by spheres at the locations of the tracking marker. So remember that picture I showed you of Mike in the suit. What we told people is, you're going to put on this suit, you can look down, and I told them everything that's black will be invisible in the virtual environment, but those little white balls will show up in VR. So people could like wave their hands around and see the tracking markers move, but they didn't see an avatar in this condition. In this condition, people could move around, but their avatar would just be standing there stiffly. Okay, so here's the stiff avatar. He looks very stiff, but it's fine. People just saw this. What we did is we told people we're going to generate the mark. We generated the mark about 8 to 12 inches in front of their center of mass. And so they would have to slide there. We would say, line your feet up with the tape mark, then take aim at the farther tape mark, close your eyes and walk to where you think the farther tape mark is. And so people had, as they moved their feet to line it up with the tape marker, they would just see the whole avatar sort of gliding forward in the stiff case. In the dot case, this is what they looked like. If they looked down, they saw this. Doesn't look like much, but again, when they moved, the little dots would move. And so what we found, okay, so here's what happened with the stiff avatar. Again, everybody's sort of underestimating. Some people are really underestimating. Here's what we saw with the dot avatar. Again, underestimating, both worse than the high. So here's the results comparison. Here's what they were doing with the full avatar. Here's what they're doing with no avatar. And when we compromised either the looks of the avatar or the movement of the avatar, in general, things got worse. And so this really inspired us to focus on trying to improve this full avatar. So maybe people are still underestimating by 10%, but that avatar was not very good. I mean, it was the best we could do, but it's still not very good. Maybe if we make the avatar better, we can get this error reduced. So we spent an awful lot of time working on that. We also worked on a whole bunch of other things. So one of the things we thought is embodying people in avatars is expensive and cumbersome and difficult. Like, how about if we just add like other avatars, like third person avatars, virtual human entourage elements to our models. And so this was inspired by architecture. So if you read books on architectural design, like here's a web page on architectural design, and step number 2 after you've built the building is to add your entourage. So who's your entourage? It's all these little pictures of people. And what the people do, they have 2 purposes. They provide a sense of scale, and they bring the drawing to life. So they serve as little rulers for size, but they also bring the drawing to life, where they give you a sense of what it would be like to move around in this environment. So you're not actually moving around. I mean, it's a picture, but you're sort of seeing other people enjoying the environment. And so there's signaling affordances for interaction with the environment through these little people. Okay, 2 things that little people are good for. Okay, so what we thought is, well, wouldn't if we could solve our problem by just adding little virtual humans to our architectural models, like wouldn't that be great? We wouldn't have to go through the whole process of embodying people in avatars. And so we ran a short experiment with an undergraduate research assistant to try to explore that. So we had 18 participants. They made egocentric distance judgments under 3 different virtual human conditions. One was no virtual human, one was a static virtual human, and a dynamic virtual human. And the virtual human was, so one of the things is we said, well, if the virtual human is going to be a ruler, the problem is people come in all different sizes. So what we did is we made the virtual human a scanned 3D model of the experimenter. So people would come into the lab, they would meet Carla, and then they would put on the headset, and there would be virtual Carla, who is, identical to real Carla, and she wore the same clothes and everything, so that it would actually really be her. So real Carla is like 5'2", virtual Carla is also 5'2". So people could use the virtual Carla as a ruler for size. And so here were the 3 different environments that Carla built. You can see they're not as nice as the environments that my architecture colleague built, because he's an architecture professor and she's a computer science student. But they were, we went with it because this is what we had. So in one, the virtual Carla was just sort of standing here, and we would put a target on the floor. People would have to walk to the target with or without the virtual Carla. In some of them, the virtual Carla was walking. You would walk down the hallway and then disappear, and then people would have to do the distance judgments. And we had 3 different hallways for the 3 different conditions: the no Carla, the static Carla, and the moving Carla. And what we found was, as we put the targets farther away, people walked farther, but we saw no significant difference in any of the avatar conditions. People didn't perceive distances any more accurately when the virtual Carla model was there than when the virtual Carla model wasn't there. And we did a follow-up experiment. My student, PhD student Sahara Siri, did this, where we had a virtual Sahar model, and we showed it at actual size. We showed it 20% smaller and 20% bigger than the real Sahar, and we had people make distance judgments. So here you can see this is the hallway model that we saw before, and this is Sahar. She went to Mall of America, scanned herself, and here she is at life size. She's about 5'5". Here she is, like little Sahar, and here she is, big Sahar, like her head almost touching the ceiling. And we put targets on the floor, and people had to walk to where they think the target was. And our hypothesis was that with little Sahar, people would perceive the environment as being bigger than it actually was, and perhaps overwalk to the target We thought they would be most accurate with the real size Sahar. And with the big Sahar, we thought people might think the environment was smaller than it really was and walk shorter to the target. But what we found is that people just sort of ignored the Sahar model. People so here's the right size. You can see that with the gray, so here we're looking at every single walk of every single participant. In general, and then here we've got the averages. So in general, people were underwalking, and they were underwalking more in the virtual world than in the real world, and you can see that. So here's when Sahar was small. Here they are in the real world, pretty much tracking, pretty much accurate. This group of participants was pretty much accurate in the real world, underwalking in the VR. This group of participants was just sort of randomly underwalking in the real world, but also underwalking in the virtual world. And again, here, underwalking in the real world, underwalking in the virtual world. So when we look at the difference between the real and virtual world, we can see that these two lines are closer here and farther apart when the Sahar model was the wrong size. So maybe putting a wrong sized avatar does have a bad effect, but putting a right sized Sahar didn't solve the problem because there's still a statistically significant difference here between the real world walking and the virtual world walking. So from that, we really couldn't conclude that these virtual human models were going to solve our problem. Okay, so what are we going to do to get higher quality self avatars in that case? So two approaches: one video based, the second model based. So with video based, I mean using a video see-through camera so that you can see yourself perfectly, but modifying yourself is going to be difficult. You don't actually even need to animate this yourself. You can just put the cameras and you can look at yourself, you move, and you don't even actually need to track necessarily if all you want is people to be able to see themselves and the virtual environment. Background subtraction can be challenging. For model-based avatars, you can go in and get a 3D body scan. You can capture your self-likeness, and you can also change it. But the problem is that if you want that 3D scanned body to move, you have to animate it. That means everything, the face, the hands, everything. Here you get all the movement for free, but you can't change it. Here, it looks just like you also, and you can change it, what it looks like, but you can't. I mean, animating it is a hassle. Okay, so here's some of the early work. This was PhD work of Lauren Fiore, who worked in my lab. This is an old Intel RealSense sensor attached to the front of the head-mounted display. Here's me in the virtual hallway. You can tell it's the virtual hallway because there's an unfortunate offset between the 3D model of the lock and the texture of its shadow. But anyway, you know, it's realistic looking because the textures are from photographs, and here's my hand being occluded by the virtual door handle. So even though my hand is seen by the camera, it's got RGB and depth, and so we can get the depth order relations correct. So we were really pleased with this. The problem is the latency. The latency was just killing us. It was the USB 2 connection, and I could keep the headset on for like 2.5 minutes until I got cybersick. The depth sensor also had a limited range. I could see my feet, but Lauren, who's 6'4", couldn't see his feet because they're out of range of the depth sensor. We had sensor noise, missing data, and we also have to deal with lighting inconsistency. So if I'm in the room and the lights are on, my hand is nicely lit. But if I went into a VR that was dark and my hand was nicely lit from the real room, you know, we'd have to figure out some way to do something about that. So no shortage of interesting research problems to work on, even though it does look like we're making progress. Here's the scanned avatar. We experimented with different kinds of scanners. This is my student Jihang Deng. This is his hand. This is Sahar, the scanned model of herself. Facial animation is something we're still kind of struggling with, but making a little bit of progress. Anyway, so we I'm sort of running short on time, so I'm gonna go quickly now and just sort of wave my hands at some of the other things we've been working on. So one of the early experiments that we did is to try to say, well, we've got two choices: video avatars. There's a lot of challenges, research challenges there. Model-based avatars, there's a lot of research challenges there. Like both of these are going to be sort of long-term investments, which we've come to a fork in the road. Which way do we want to go? Is there some sort of like inherently our video avatars, if they weren't going to be better, if so, then we'll go down the video avatar path. Scanned avatars inherently, are they going to be better? Then we go down the scanned avatar path. So we did an experiment to try to figure out if people somehow had more intrinsic trust in what they saw when they were seeing a self-avatar representation obtained using video technology versus using scanned technology. And so this was based on research results from Ernst and Banks showing that if you give people conflicting visual haptic input, their answer is going to skew towards the modality that they trust the most. And so we had two modalities, video and model based, and we wanted to see if people would tend to answer more towards the model, the way that the modality that they trusted the most. So we set up a visual haptic cue conflict, and the idea was that if people trusted the whichever avatar they trusted more, then they might go more with the visual and less with the haptic. So here's in a nutshell what we did. Here's the video avatar. You can see the real sense camera. There's Jihang looking at his hands. Here's the model-based avatar. There's Jihang looking at his wearing the same headset, but looking at his hands that are being tracked by the Vicon tracker. And the idea is that you would move your hands back and forth, and you would touch a real block. And in VR, you would see your hands moving back and forth and touching a block. Before you went into the experiment, we trained the heck out of people. We had all of these different blocks, and we had a 1/2 hour training process until people could accurately. So it was visual, and then it was haptic. So for visual, we would show them a block. We would tell them how long it is. We would take it away. We would show them another block, tell them how long it is, take it away. We did that for all of these blocks here. Then we would show them a block and ask them to tell us how long it was. And if they got it right, we would show them another one. So we would show them all the ones that we had given them the answers for, and then we would show them ones that we hadn't given them the answers for. And anytime they made a mistake, they had to go back to the beginning and get trained all over again. So people were really good. They were like, oh yeah, that's an 18, 16. They were totally on top of it. They also did it with blindfolded. They had to touch a block. So we would make them touch a block, and we would say, that's an 18, touch a block, that's a 2. And then anyway, so people were pretty perfect at this before they went into the VR. Then when they went into the VR, we played a trick on them. They touched a block that was a different size than the block they saw, and they had to report the size of the block that they touched. And we looked at, are they going to report what they feel, meaning they don't trust the visuals, or are they going to report what they see, meaning they trust the visuals? And obviously they're going to report something in between, but whatever they report, is it going to be closer to what they see, or is it going to be closer to what they feel? And in particular, is it going to be closer to what they see in like a particular, like if it's closer to what they see in the video see-through case than in the model-based case, well, then we conclude that they trust the video representation more. Anyway, so we the upshot of it. Oh, and we also had a number of trials where the block was invisible, so that there was no block and they were just using their hands. And I think we also had trials where the block was visible, but the hands were invisible. At any rate, after all of this effort, what we found is we didn't find a statistically significant difference between the two different avatar representations. So, each one had its strengths and its weaknesses. People trusted and didn't trust them. It's sort of equal levels. So that was a little bit disappointing after all that trouble. But we did find that visual dominance was stronger when any hands were visible, whether they be video or or model based. So people definitely, you know, had trust in the hands. They just didn't have more trust in one type of hand than another type of hand, which maybe in retrospect is not that surprising because the hands looked identical. They were really high quality in both cases. So anyway, we we also here I'll just go really quickly. This is some work that Sahar was doing, looking at again the video based and the model based representation. So here in each case, the participant and the experimenter were represented in the same way. So in one case, people looked like this, and Sahar looked like this, and they would interact with Sahar. In the other case, people they interacted with the scan model of Sahar, and the controllers are sort of pasted onto the back of her hands, which is a little awkward. But anyway, this is the model-based Sahar, and then here's where they were wearing a Z Mini, and they could see real Sahar. And she couldn't see them. In every case, she just saw this, but that's fine. So they would go through 3 sets of interaction exercises with 3 different representations of Sahar. And we would compare like co-presence and in particular trustworthiness, because our hypothesis is that even though these two look pretty much the same, here that you're seeing, it's not what your eyeballs are seeing, but it's what the camera is seeing. So there, we hypothesize that your sense of trust and co-presence might be a little bit higher with this representation than with this representation, because here she's a computer model, and it just happens to be a computer model that matches her, but maybe not. I mean, maybe the real Sahara is smiling and the computer model is just doing nothing. Or maybe the computer model would be smiling and the real Sahara wouldn't be. And, there's that element of doubt. Whereas here, if Sahara is smiling, you're going to see her smile and she's really smiling. And her shoulders, if she tenses her shoulders or if she relaxes her shoulders, you can see that a little bit better with this one. And sure enough, what we found at the end of this was a strong preference for the video-based avatar, which was associated with higher ratings of interpersonal trust. We also found that people made more attempts at mutual gaze. So even though Sahar's wearing a headset in both cases, I mean, you can't see her face, they tried to make eye contact more in this case than in the other cases. So anyway, a small bit of a tendency or a small bit of evidence that the video-based avatar representation maybe should be what we're going for. So anyway, I think I will stop here because I have an unlimited amount of things to talk to, but not an unlimited amount of time with you guys. So maybe I'll stop sharing my slides, and or maybe I'll just move right to my last slide to thank everybody in my group. And take questions.
Okay, thank you, Vicky. As an excellent talk. Um, yeah, and you're getting to a part of your research that I was actually going to ask about, and that was that looked like Lane's work you're bringing up there.
Yeah. This is Lane here. And actually, I don't know what happened to Karisha's picture. He should be in here too because he's also done the non-photorealistic work.
Cool, cool. Well, we do have some questions, and the first one is why do most people underestimate? Is there a running hypothesis?
That's a really, really, really good question. And what I can say is that in the beginning, people were looking for sort of I'll refer to it, it's like a geometric response, like something in the stimulus. So, or something in what people were seeing that wasn't quite accurate. But there's also, I mean, it could be because of what you're seeing, or it could be because of how you're interpreting what you're seeing. And I've always been more on the side of thinking that, well, there's probably a role of how you interpret what you see. And so we did some experiments that I didn't talk about, but it basically involved people experiencing the exact same thing in VR, but having experienced something, having had. So we had some people that we would bring them into VR, and we would have them make distance judgments. And then after that, we would take them to the real world. They would make distance judgments, and then we would have, and then we had another group of people that would um, do the distance judgments in the real world, and then put on the headset and do the distance judgments in the VR. And we found that people who had done the distance judgments in the real world first tended to walk longer in the VR than people who just like walked into the lab and got the headset put on them. So that made me think it's not just what's hitting your eyeballs, because what's hitting eyeballs was the same in the two cases. It was sort of how people are interpreting what's hitting their eyeballs. And not to say that there's nothing in the signal. It could be that there's both. That it could be that partly it's what you see and partly it's how you interpret what you see. We spend an awful lot of time looking at things like presence, because you saw that in all of the charts I showed you. There's those two or three people who are just spot on. Same in the VR and the real world. And we tried to what is up with these people? Why are these people what is it about them that makes them not susceptible to distance underestimation in VR? And we were never able to put our finger on it. We tried personality tests and presence tests and just a bajillion things, and we were never able to figure out I mean, and it could just be, in any distribution, you're always going to have people at the tails. And so it could be that those were just the people who are randomly at the tail of walking more in the VR. I don't know. But that's a really, really good question. I think if we could understand why people are underestimating distances, we'd have a better shot at trying to figure out what we could do to solve the problem. Some of the things that people say, well, we find that people make distance errors in VR, and the errors tend to decrease over time, and the errors also decrease with feedback. So then people say, well, why don't you just let people walk around in VR with their eyes open and touch things in the real world that are matched to the locations of things in the virtual world, and then they get really comfortable with it. And that's a perfectly valid possibility. We at one point we sort of played around with the idea of having sort of a pre-room. So you'd have a small room which existed in VR and the real world, and you could become comfortable with the VR in that room, and then transition from there into the virtual model of a place that didn't exist yet. And this was work with group from Germany, Frank Steinecke and colleagues, and did find that the pre-experience in the transitional environment helped. So as opposed to people who just got plopped into the VR without the pre-experience. But one of the problems is if people just learn to say oh, everything's farther away than I think it is, I'll just walk longer. It's still that won't really solve the problem if you put the client into the headset, and they're going to start making snap judgments like, oh, my kid's bedroom is too small, or oh, this room feels too claustrophobic, or whatever. It's hard to you really want the client to perceive the right thing from the beginning. So maybe for other uses it's the acclimation thing could work. I don't know. But it's not a total solution.
Yeah, that reminds me of something Steve Ellis said once, actually, about the purpose of a good user interface isn't to be good enough to prevent people from having to learn it. It's to reduce the period of time they need to adapt to proficiency. And it's at same sort of situation when describing that with VR. What can we do to reduce the amount of time between when they get in that headset to when their snap judgments will actually be correct? So yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, it's fun stuff, and I tend to agree with you on, it's a complicated interplay of it's not just geometry, it's not just perception, it's not just cognition. It's a processing pipeline, and there's feedback loops all the way through, where one informs the other and then feeds back, and people adapt as a result of this processing pipeline. So yeah, yeah, it's very neat stuff. We have another question from the chat. Let's see. If the varying sized person was used as a landmark, uh, people have to walk towards instead of the tape mark. Do you believe that this would have resulted in your expected results, or under or over walking?
Oh yeah, that's a really good question. So it turns out there's been some interesting work by the team at the Max Planck Institute where they had people walk towards avatars. And what they found is that you really couldn't get people to walk up to where an avatar was because of the social effects, right? So even if it's just a computer generated model, people sort of wanted to maintain their personal distance, and so they actually had the avatar facing you, and you were supposed to walk up to it, versus not facing you, and you were supposed to walk up to it. And they found that it was not facing you, people would walk like right up to it, but if it was facing you, people would keep their like 2 feet of distance, even when the task was walk up to the avatar. So that's why we put the avatar like slightly behind where the target was. And we also put the avatar looking sort of at a 45-degree angle because we wanted to avoid this sort of effect that the Max Planck people had found about folks like not wanting to walk up to the target because of social distance issues with the avatar. So I don't know. I mean, we were hoping that people would somehow incorporate the avatar into their sense of scale of the environment. And it seemed that people did sort of, but maybe putting the avatar like more front and center, like you're suggesting, would have forced them to take the avatar more into consideration. um, we could have like put the avatar there and then made the avatar disappear, for example, and then they walk to where the avatar like used to be, or something. I don't know. That's an interesting idea. We could have done more to sort of we thought about having the walk past the avatar, but the hallway is a little bit narrow, and we were just kind of worried again about these. We didn't want people veering off to the side to try to avoid the avatar. Um, and then people have also found that when you're walking to a target, if there's anything in between you and the target, that can affect how far away you think the target is. And so we yeah, that's why we stuck the avatar behind the target. But you're right. I mean, in fact, some of the other work that we've done, we did some work out in an open field where we had a target on grass, and we had the headset with the video see-through cameras, and so you could see the target and the grass, everything the camera could see. And then we had a bunch of other conditions. Then we had one condition where everything was invisible except the target. And we actually found that people performed the same when they could see everything, including the target, and when they could see the target only and not the grass or the trees or anything except the target. And what we concluded from that is, people have just got they've got this task, and they're there for one reason, which is to close their eyes and walk to the target. And that's what they're focused on. And if there's anything sort of in the periphery that's not really task relevant, um, well, that was the explanation we had, was that if there's things in the periphery that are not task relevant, they're just going to not attend to them. And so I mean, it's a very good question about if we could have made the avatar, use the avatar as the target, would force the avatar to be task relevant as opposed to allowing the avatar to potentially be task irrelevant. So I like the sentiment. We just have to think a little bit more about how to make it work with the social distance, the social, yeah, proxemic issues.
And a reminder, if anyone has any more questions, feel free to type them into the live stream chat. Um, so, on the topic of social proximity with avatars, a lot of people who've tried VR might not have interacted with an avatar, whether a self avatar or another, and it's a shockingly compelling experience. One of the I remember when I got my first Rift DK1. There weren't a lot of experiences out there for it, and someone put together it was. I mean, if you explain it to someone, you're like, "That sounds so stupid. Why would you do it?" You were in a room, and there was an avatar, and the only thing that well, actually, the avatar did two things. The main thing the avatar did is it watched you as you walked around the space. That was it. And then if you got too close, it leaned back. And those simple interactions they give you goosebumps like, ooh, that thing sees me, you know. So
Yeah.
even when dealing with something that you know is a synthetic person, you still you know on a very primitive level treat it as though it is a creature with its own agency. So yeah,
Yeah,
very cool
I
stuff.
remember I have a similar experience in very early on in VR. I think it was a Wizard demo where I put on the headset and there was a bunch of avatars, and one of them was this guy, and he didn't have a shirt on and he was dancing. And I was just like, I really want to keep my distance from this fellow. Like for some reason, I just, really didn't feel that comfortable being too close to this shirtless dancing guy. But it was so funny because I mean, they're all fake, but I still didn't want him to get too close.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, we've got one more question. Uh, what about if the target itself's size was varied? And
Oh,
yeah,
that's a really good question.
yeah,
So I was talking to Betty Moeller about some of the experiments that she had done, and she reported to me anecdotally that in under some circumstances, her intuition was that people were really using target size as a clue. And so when the target was closer, any target, a traffic cone. So we used orange traffic cones. Orange traffic cone is closer to you, it's going to be bigger. Farther away from you, it's going to be smaller. And she found that in these situations of impoverished cues, that she felt like people were using the size of the target. Um, and I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, it makes sense that people would be using the size of the target. So in our experiment, when we just had the cone and we erased everything except the cone, the cone was when it was farther away, it was higher in the visual. I mean, not higher in the visual field. I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess higher related to for a given head angle, it would be higher. And it was also smaller. And one of the things we asked people, in fact, was to show us how big they thought the traffic cone was with their hands so that we could try to see to what extent people were using so people are we had our traffic cone was sort of a mini traffic cone. I think it was about this tall, and the real traffic cones are like this tall. So we thought like, oh, if people are like misperceiving the size of our traffic cone, then they'll misperceive the distance of the cone. But we didn't find a relationship between how big they thought the cone was and systematic amounts of underwalking. Like people who thought the cone was smaller didn't underwalk less than people who thought the cone was bigger. But yes, and in fact, I was talking with somebody about an experiment that we're planning for the future, and one of the things I recommended to them is to consider keeping the size of the target constant, like sort of showing people like here's a target, and when it comes closer, we're going to make it smaller so that it fills the same visual angle on your retina. And when it goes farther away, we're going to make it bigger so that the target is always going to look like a circle of the same size, no matter how far away it is. Just just because, yes, I think people do use the size of the target. Um, we try to use targets that are just like a piece of tape on the ground. So, we figure it's not like it's a super familiar object where people, the tape can be 3/4 of an inch or an inch or 1.5 inches, I don't think people could judge from the width of the tape, and certainly not from the length of the tape. Size, distance information, but if it's a familiar object, then I think people would tend to people could potentially tend to infer distance from size. And so that's one of the reasons why people use like spots and stripes and things like that rather than um, coffee cups or whatever. But yeah, really good question.
Cool, cool. Well, that's got us pretty close to the end of our time. Vicky, I just want to say thank you again. And as you were talking, I remembered something very important that I did not mention in your introduction. That in addition to being an outstanding scientist and leader in your field, you're also just a really cool person. And I want you to know that.
Thank you so
Oh, you're
much.
welcome. And again, thank you for coming today. And everyone out there, cyberspace, wherever you are, thank you for attending today's talk as well. Excellent questions. And keep an eye on our seminar page and our YouTube channel because, we host speakers like this, periodically. And it's always a lot of fun. And Vicky, you were not a disappointment, I got to tell you. I really enjoyed your talk. So with that said,